Hashtag activism. The use of hashtags on social media to spread a shared slogan. It has three characteristics. One, it spreads very quickly because there are no national, cultural boundaries to it. The Me Too movement, for example, proves to people that sexual abuse can affect women of minority races and even of other nationalities. Second, it is easier psychologically to post something on social media for everyone to view rather than stepping on stage and protesting if you're going to be the only one to do it. When more people step out initially, eventually we will move things into the real world. But thirdly, what happens in social media translates into real life. When a Chinese university found one of its professors to be involved in the Me Too movement, they launched an investigation and fired him upon finding out that the allegations were true. Political change means getting change from legislative bodies. And the common characteristics of legislators is that they are voted in, which means that they must listen and seek the opinions of the people. Once there is a large enough mass of people, or if there are compelling stories and reasons for them to listen to, they must enact change. Our stance, therefore, is that we support the use of hashtag activism. We also support the use of other means that push for political change, such as lobbying and protesting. Just that they have their limits too, and hashtag activism overcomes these limits. So what are the current methods for political change other than hashtag activism? Firstly, traditional media networks. However, they are often controlled, no thank you ma'am, by the rich and the powerful, which often have diverse interests, and they may be the ones that are perpetuating these forms of abuse themselves. Therefore, these grievances would not get aired through traditional media networks. Secondly, traditional movements like NGOs, while they do good work, often they are not receiving enough support because they don't have the funds to broadcast widely what they are standing for. Thirdly, victims coming out themselves. Often they are unwilling to do so because they are afraid of being abused, they are afraid of being bullied for coming out of safety to share their stories. When more people do so on social media, they see that it is possible for them themselves to do it without being bullied. That is when more people step out to share their stories. Fourthly, people engendering change themselves by starting their own movements. Often there is a high barrier of entry to the highest level of policy making. Lobbying does nothing if you don't achieve a critical mass, if you don't get sufficient support. In the absence of hashtag activism on social media, current methods are woefully inadequate. Even those with good intentions become drowned out by a sea of indifference. Opposition must stand for all these inadequate and deficient methods in the lack of achieving fast social and political change. Therefore, they must defend a world without hashtag activism. The yardstick will be on which side best provides tangible benefits for those who are suffering and abused. Now on to my case division. My first substantive will be on attaining a critical mass, second substantive on the weight of victim impacts, while my second speaker will forward his argument. So now to my first substantive on attaining a critical mass. The cause is that hashtag movements step out of boundaries that typical movements have. Physical, cultural, national boundaries. Because social media spreads worldwide. A public post on Instagram and Facebook can be viewed by any of its billions of users worldwide. So it is no longer about that one female whose story of abuse is going to be shared. It's about the many stories of undeniable abuse, suffering, and discrimination that will be shared with everyone worldwide. The effect is that more people who suffer will step up to share their stories. And this draws those who are not suffering and who are touched by these stories, the majority of the population who don't have these experiences, to come up to support. Because once they see it is not something that affects one person, but something that affects so many people, as they have seen, in fact, from even other countries and other races online, this is when they step up. And we analyze to you that there are a spectrum of people who will step up and support these movements. There are those who are indifferent, and there are those who already support. Those who already support will support these movements on both sides. But those who are indifferent, either because they are unsure of the movement or they are unaware of the movement's existence, these are the people we change their mindsets of. We encourage them to step out because they see that more people are willing to do so already. The significance is that we provide a critical mass that moves on to the real world to fight for change. When people call up their representatives or senators, or even tag them on their social media accounts, this is what fight for change. Because legislators must listen. If they want to stay in power, they cannot dismiss the numbers. They cannot dismiss the fact that thousands of women across their state have been abused. The comparative on their side is that these stories, these Examples of people being abused never see the light. These stories never get to politicians, and they never get the critical mass needed to convince politicians to fight for change. So now to my second substantive on the weight of victim impacts. The cause is that the stories shared on social media, such as how women sharing their experiences of sexual abuse, are powerful stories. They are stories about how the men they trusted raped them, how they're called sluts because they draw sexual harassment, how nobody trusted them when they speak up. We add in the fact that of the power of social media, about how they galvanize people who previously were afraid of stepping out due to fear of bullying and ostracization to now step out. Because once one person steps out and shares their sufferings and stories of abuse, when likes and comments of support start pouring in, others will follow. Because they see that no, it is not a case where I'll be bullied, it's fine for me to step out and share my story. In fact, people will respect me for that. The effect is that the impacts on their lives stay on social media for everyone to watch. Every common victim is now a story of discrimination. The significance is that politicians cannot dismiss this. The weight of the stories stay and last. We challenge Republican senators on opposition to discredit the psychological and physiological suffering of 156 victims that have all stood up to tell their stories about how Larry Nassar abused them. When they've seen their dear colleague Roy Moore knocked out by trying to dismiss claims of child sexual abuse on social media. The comparative is that stories on their side will never see the light of the day. Victims are afraid. Therefore, one step forward towards hashtag movements, a giant leap for political change, we're proud to propose.
Right, thank you very much to the first proposition speaker. And it's my pleasure now to invite first opposition speaker to offer us initial response.
Activism has never been able to enact strong and long-lasting change. The only thing that he has done is to create governmental and public complacency in justice issues and causing no concrete change due to the desensitization of such issues, which I'll explain in my substantive later. This means that the importance of such issues are often downplayed, and therefore no real political change, concrete political change, is ever enacted. The hashtag MeToo campaign or the hashtag NotMyMuslim campaign can appear every decade, can spring up in social media every decade, but no real change is ever enacted. So before moving on, few points of contention for the House today. They basically said that because the hashtag activism is widespread, media is widespread, therefore it will create political change. However, I will rebut this in my second substantive, which I'll flag it out later, where the activeness on their side is not meaningful at all, even with the widespread discourse. And then they also said that this slogan, this hashtag activism is equals to the opinions of people voiced for every side. We think that is not true, because not everything can be truly expressed through just one slogan. Because the issue is often one-sided in this media, right? And this therefore creates hostility between parties. And we think that policies should be objective and not shaped by the angle of such people, because they might create extremist view because it's only one-sided of the issue. Okay. So moving on to my stance. We believe that hashtag activism is harmful and inhibits change from being enacted, which I'll explain my substantive later again. So moving on to our policy. Firstly, we'll organize town council sessions where people with queries or problems can then voice their opinions in a protected space where people can speak their mind. And we encourage people with queries or problems to speak up, and therefore these voices can then be forwarded to the government and taken into consideration for future laws and policies. Therefore, we think that our policy will create substantial change. We also have government websites where people can post queries to as well, and we highly encourage them to do so. And we also encourage campaign movements to work closer with the government in terms of shaping policies and change in the society. So, our yardstick for today. We think that the side that creates more constructive activism and can achieve significant and long-lasting political change can therefore win this debate. So moving on to my substantives. My first substantive, how does hashtag activism create stagnation within political change for justice issues? So firstly, what is hashtag activism? I think that is a slogan that is sensationalized and simplified by large use in social media because it's widespread, right? And it's also basically a few catchphrases that people can just use without much consideration to what it truly implies. So it's you only know the surface of it, you only know the name of it, but you don't know what actually happens underneath all that. So, my second tier, how does it affect the stakeholders, which is basically the public and the government? I think that we think that in the event that hashtag activism is going to be spread throughout the entire internet, and like some form of action has been taken, for example, teacher being fired in like American university because of the Me Too campaign, right? This gives people and government a false perception that these campaigns are enough to enact significant change. But before moving on, yes, sir.
The hashtag he for she movement broke the belief that men could not be feminists and encouraged men to speak up for women in conservative and oppressive societies. Your side thinks this is a bad thing.
No, we do not. Okay, so basically the he for she campaign, right? We think that it is still springing up like every decade or every period of time, and we think that it is not as effective in creating substantial political change. So moving on. This is especially harmful because of the fact that like people and government will not be taking any further steps into spreading, for example, the Me Too campaign or Me Too. They think that they have done enough. They think that they send like 20 posts on Facebook and they've done enough to like create change when in reality it's not. Because like I think that rape and sexual assault is still running rampant in the world today, and it is often overlooked by people in the government because the hashtag activism will cause change, which is wrong. No policies will then be enacted by the government, for example, to prevent or regulate behaviors that lead to such assaults in the first place. I think that they can sensationalize it every like 10 years and create one arrest every time it happens, but you don't think it's long-lasting or even substantial enough to like change this social justice issue or like create political change.
Information, ma'am.
So moving on to my third tier, why it shortchanges individuals to know more. I think that not once they spread this hashtag, right, I think that there's no incentive to find out what's happening in the world because of the complacency that I have characterized earlier. Hence, this causes political disawareness, which creates an echo chamber effect because they are stuck in their own bubble regarding this issue, and that because it only has a one-sided view, can create extremist views as well. I think that when it truly comes to the time when these issues need to have active contribution, right? This will send like people will just not do anything because they think that sending a message to 20 people is enough already. So moving on to my second substantive about how this is not meaningful activism on their side, which is a rebuttal, right? Okay, so basically we think that their activism spread is not meaningful because it does not tackle the full implication of the issue. And it only spreads, like, for example, one individual's experience instead of the entire campaign as a whole. And even if the intention is really there, in reality, the government and people would just think that the short-term changes enough when there's like no long-term complications, right? So it's really a myopic perception. We concede that there's a discourse, but after it stops trending, we think that everything will just stop because like people will think that, oh, the world is peaceful enough to live in. Hence, we think that no significant change will happen on their side. So, quickly moving on to my third substantive about why our side is more effective with our policy. I think that once you take away the presence of media, it eliminates people's queries about the media being like overblown or sensationalized. And when governments can truly take into account people's views and voices and truly enact constructive change, I think this is when the social justice issues can then be improved on our side much better. And hence, I'm so proud to propose.
Thank you very much to the first opposition speaker, and it's my pleasure now to invite the second proposition to offer response.
The main pillar of opposition's case was that hashtag activism will never ever create any tangible, practical changes in the real world. So as long as proposition can provide just one example of how hashtag activism has made a change in society, opposition's case already doesn't stand. So let's just throw out a few examples. First, the fact that the females in Saudi Arabia got to attend their first football and basketball match because the he for she movement and the Me Too movement allowed both females as well as males in Saudi Arabia champion for the rights of females. The fact that because of the Free the Five movement in China, the Chinese government were pushed to release 5 dissenters of the Chinese Communist Party that they had kidnapped and captured from Hong Kong. The fact that the Me Too movement in Chicago forced Ford to pay out a $22 million settlement to all the females who are sexually harassed in their factories. All these examples again and again, all popping up only in the last 3 to 4 years, not one entire decade that opposition decides to assert. So opposition's case already doesn't stand. But then they wanted to offer us the alternative of town council sessions. They told us how they would keep all the other infrastructure in status quo. My first speaker already told you that the current infrastructure in status quo isn't working because there aren't enough people backing it and there aren't enough people checking on these institutions. We have town council sessions too, but how do we do it better? When the minorities on our side can organize themselves via the hashtag movement to attend that council session in hundreds, in 200s groups of people. No thank you, sir. That's when we no thank you, madam. That's how we better these town council sessions. On opposition, it's only that 1 or 2 minorities who will dare have the audacity to attend an entire council session full of white Americans in their state. That's when they cannot have the benefits from town council sessions. They never provided us any alternative as to why their solution was better. So 2 points of contention for us today. 1, will people even be amassed in the first place? And second, if they are, what are the implications of that? So on to the first idea. They wanted to attack our case, telling us that hashtag movements only spring up every decade and they don't happen to have any social change. But they don't understand that the hashtag movement, simply factually, has only come about in recent years with technological advancement. So there wasn't even any hashtag movements 10 years ago. It's the Me Too, it's the hashtag Me Too, hashtag He for She movements that have been popping up in 2016, in 2017. So that argument doesn't really stand because we are only looking at a young 2 to 3 years of the hashtag activism being available in society. But then they wanted to tell us how the critical mass obtained was illegitimate because, well, the sufferings of the victims will only be reduced to simple catchphrases. And so our side has a very, let's just respond to this with 3 responses. Firstly, they told us that they'll reduce the quality of political discourse. No, because we have to understand that factually, people don't just put up the hashtag there. More often than not, accompanying the hashtag is a person's views on the issue or their argumentation as to why that particular movement or that political cause is legitimate. So it's not just someone retweeting that hashtag and that's it. They attach their own ideas, their own opinions, and their own views. So it's factually incorrect to claim on opposition that every single person will only retweet that simple catchphrase or that simple words. But let's just do a comparative here. Because we told you that the group of actors we are focusing on today aren't the people who are already going to champion for their cause. If they're already going to champion for feminism so vehemently, then they won't simply retweet that 2 or 3 words, he for she, me too. More often than not, accompanying this hashtag movement and the hashtag that they retweet, they're also going to add their own analysis and their own opinions. On top of that, they're going to go out into the real world and champion as well. So these are the people we're talking about. We are talking about the people who don't even know this movement exists, who don't even know the value of these movements. So at the worst case, we finally get these people who don't even know the movements exist to know that they exist. And that's when we can allow this group of people on the spectrum to become increasingly interested in such movement. And that's when they're more able to go out, no thank you sir, no thank you madam, and enact the tangible changes in society when they realize that these movements are one, that they exist, and second, that they are valuable. So on to the second idea, because they refuse to tackle our substantive on the weight of victims' testimonies. We heard no response coming out from opposition, and therefore, they concede that firstly, is already beneficial to the victims alone because they get to release their sufferings into society and their sufferings and the oppression that they face, no thank you madam, have been heard by members in society. But second, we told you that there's a tangible impact of these victim statements because the senators and the politicians in society cannot simply discredit and delegitimize the sufferings of all these victims without losing any of their political capital or their political votes. So it's on our side when the actual politicians are pressured by the impacts of these victim statements and testimonies to enact social change, that's when we better the plight for these victims. So moving on to our last substantive, on encouraging younger generations to become more politically involved. But before I move on, tell me why I'm wrong, madam.
If rape victims advocate the raping of their rapists in a Me Too hashtag campaign, would you want this?
Thank you, madam. We say that this is not what people are advocating for. In fact, it is the hashtag movements that have enlightened the extremist feminists that that's not the way to go. It's the hashtag movement for Me Too that allows these feminists to agree and finally come to the realization that feminism isn't female superiority, it's equality between the two genders. We do it better. So moving on to our substantive, encouraging younger generations to become more politically involved. The problem with status quo is that many politicians and government disproportionately are made of older generations that are unable to properly represent the younger generations. They create policies like the Brexit or pulling of the Paris Climate Accords that cause the youth to suffer in the long term, the people who are going to inhabit and control the earth in the future. This means that the younger generations, politically, are misrepresented and underrepresented in the government. How do we solve this problem? We specifically cater to the preferred means of the youth, their technological savviness, by allowing them to express their opinions and themselves on the social media, and that's when they are able to become more incentivized to go out there and enact social change because they know that their views matter. Because on our side, when we protect the minorities as well as allow the majority to speak up for them, I'm so proud to propose.
Thank you very much to the second proposition speaker, and to offer us analysis for that side of the house, please invite the second opposition speaker here.
We then cite proposition for the enlightening showcasing of the different cases where it has worked. But we see that as long as our side proves that the harms outweighs what little benefits there are, our side will essentially have won the debate. So before moving on to my substantive about how these harms already established campaigns and movements, I have two major clashes for the House debate. Firstly, on whether which side is better able to achieve the numbers, and secondly, if we achieve the numbers, which side has better discourse. So we see that side proposition has just brushed off our case by saying, oh, nobody will come to these town council sessions and they will just organize themselves through hashtags. But our first speaker has really brought to you this idea that because there is so much hashtag movement, there is so much that people are currently being desensitized. They're being desensitized, and therefore what happens is that they will not actually go to such things because, as they have rightly pointed out, it is so much easier to just post online as opposed to do something active. So when we give them the legitimate excuse, they say, oh, posting online is sufficient, posting online is all you need to do, it will actually cancel out all the positive, concrete actions that these people could have taken. So what their side is essentially saying, so yes, we do admit there is change, but we see that this change is extremely short term, because what happens is that as time goes on, these slogans will essentially start to lose their meaning. More and more people will start to see them, and they will just see the tip of the iceberg, and they won't actually think about, oh, what else can I do to
Point of
help?
information,
No,
ma'am.
thank you, sir. What can I do to help? What can I do further to do such things? And instead, it just shortchanges the potential by telling these people, I have done enough, and that is all we need to do, which is actually precisely the problem on side proposition. So they pointed out about how this allows victims to step out when they see examples of such. We see this is something that is non-mutually exclusive. This is something that can happen in rallies and campaigns as well. For example, like Emma Watson in the He for She campaign, we see that it was the actual campaign, it was the actual speeches that Emma Watson gave instead of the hashtags she posted that made an actual difference. We see that in both cases, you need someone to come out and speak first, and regardless of whether it's hashtags or let's say in real life, you still need that person. So hashtags essentially doesn't help the victims as much as they say, because we see that as long as there's a person in real life who dares to step out, other victims will follow. In fact, we even say that our side is even more powerful, and we pressure politicians even more, because what happens is that these people are giving this speech in real
Information,
life.
madam.
No, thank you, sir. They're giving this speech in real life. You can see their emotions, you can see how traumatized they've been, and therefore it will have a far greater impact on you as opposed to some sentences.
Point of information, madam.
No, thank you, sir. As opposed to some sentences you post online that people might not even actually take the time to read because they're already so busy and they feel like, oh, I've already posted this and I've retweeted this already, so therefore I don't actually.
Point of
have to do
information,
everything.
madam.
No, yes, sir.
When Ford Factory, after the hashtag movement, was forced to employ independent observers in their factories to prevent females from being sexually harassed in the future, your side says that this is short-term change.
Yes, we do say this is short-term change, because what happens is that in the long term, as the discourse slowly dies out, as the politicians see that, oh, we've done enough thing, and they feel a false sense of complacency, what happens is that there will be less and less concrete changes. And this is why we see that our side does it far better, because we have like campaigns, we have actual people who are trying to get in touch with the government, who are actually doing the concrete thing to get the government to prioritize their policies. For example, like the feminism movement that is asking for like job top wages, and like policies to protect the people who have been raped and sexually assaulted. So moving on to my substantive about how these harms already established movements. So what we see is that, for example, already established feminist campaigns will now be drowned out by the Me Too movement, because as they rightly point out, social media is so widespread that like people will just read these things, and instead they'll start to neglect like the more concrete actions of going out to politicians, of actually finding policies that actually help the people. So we see that in such a case, this funding will get even lesser. They pointed out that traditional NGOs doesn't work because they don't have enough support, they don't have enough funding, but we see that on their side, it's even worse because now there's even less support, there's even less funding. And we see that this is extremely harmful because on their side, that discourse is extremely one-sided. We see that while we do acknowledge that these victims have suffered, we see that it's a very hostile environment in which anyone with an opposing view that wants to come out and make a meaningful comment, they will just be condemned by everyone else because everyone else sees that these are the things, and we see that this is extremely harmful because what happens is that the discourse environment will become very hostile, and it's only like touching on the surface. For example, like they just tell their stories, but they don't tell about like how it affects them afterwards and such things, which you feel is extremely powerful. So what we see is that on their side, it delegitimizes established campaigns because what happens is that it simplifies these very complex social justice issues into just one word. For example, like the idea of xenophobia in America is just distilled into 3 words of not my Islam, instead of focusing on the very complex causes and effects, the histories of such discrimination. And we see that this is extremely harmful because when people no longer have the incentives to find out about such things, they no longer have the incentives to go to like rallies, go to protest, we see that actually this pressure on like politicians actually decreases, because what happens is that as social media's trends generally move from one of the topics to another hot topic, as is the nature of social media, it is, as we see in recent years, a lot of trends have come and gone. We see that it is the actual concrete campaigns who does the concrete changes, but when it solely depend on hashtag activism, what happens is that all these changes will be ignored and drowned out, and as such, please go with our side, which deals with the important long-term benefits instead of the short-term ones.
Thank you very much to the speaker from the opposition. And now to continue the analysis, I invite the third substantive speaker from the proposition chamber.
Opposition lose today's debate because they never offered us a credible alternative. They never dealt with the lines of analysis from first speaker about the means on their side fail. We give you concrete and uncontested analysis in first speaker about how existing methods like traditional news networks, like traditional movements, like even rallies and campaigns are woefully inadequate and they're deficient, and they never dealt with this. Which means they concede that at their best case, they will never be able to achieve the same kind of change as our side. So even if our side is only marginally effective, we still win this debate. 2 points of contention for the House today. The first on increasing support for movements, and the second on engendering political change. So first, on increasing support for movements. In their first substantive, they give us 2 tiers. First of all, the hashtag activism was catchphrases without meaning, and therefore people were becoming desensitized. And secondly, that people think they have done enough and they don't have an incentive to find out. So first, on catchphrases without meaning. We told in the second speaker how this was not the case, right? About how hashtag movements actually bring to light the stories and experiences of victims, and how they are not catchphrases without meaning because of the accompanying stories that come with them. In fact, the hashtag catchphrases are just for the sake of spreading the story, and therefore these stories and experiences actually raise more awareness and engender more change on our side. But secondly, they drop the significance of our second substantive, because the significance even if just 2 million people use just a catchphrase, it means that there's a power that politicians cannot ignore, because this retweeting of these hashtags is already a form of political lobbying. They drop this argument, so clearly people are not becoming desensitized. This actually increases support for movements. Next, they told us that people think that they have done enough, and therefore they have no incentive to find out more. No, because previously and continually on opposition, indifference was excused with ignorance. With hashtag activism, when you raise awareness and more people know about this, there remains no excuse for not doing anything. Indifference is something that can be condemned and vilified, and therefore there's no, because in the absence of an excuse for indifference, we think that people cannot be indifferent anymore. But let's talk about the very worst case on our side, which is all the opposition want to talk about. Even if people don't do anything, even if people just pass on the message, we think this is still a good thing. One, the fact that there is still such a large following already is a form of political lobbying. Two, we think that sharing it is good in and of itself, because you share it with more people who also have the potential to take action. Because even if you yourself don't take action, other people can. That is what's powerful about hashtag activism. That is a unique benefit that we have. Let's now deal with second speaker's argument that existing movements are drowned out by activism. No, because traditional movements actually ride on the waves of this hashtag activism and thereby gain more support, because hashtag activism often actually refers to the good work currently being done by movements. We think we saw the hashtag he for she and hashtag me too movements actually highlighting what feminist movements have been doing in status quo. If anything, proposition is a site that highlights the good work currently being done by under-recognized movements. We get these movements more following. Don't let opposition tell you otherwise. So how is it that proposition makes the situation better? We told you about attending critical mass for 3 reasons. First of all, very simply, people are aware of the problem. Second of all, discriminatory politicians cannot ignore the problem. And third of all, the bandwagon effect, about how people continue to ramp up the support for these movements even if they don't take action about it. Yes, ma'am.
So what are the concrete policies enacted on your side because of these campaigns of hashtag activism?
Ma'am, we think that the concrete policies are enacted because of this hashtag activism. I mean, it's not to say that concrete policies will be enacted anyways. We think that these concrete policies were enacted because of hashtag activism. We give you an example in second speaker about the Free the Five movement in China, and this hashtag activism actually forced China to free prisoners which they had illegally detained. So we've already given you so many of these examples about how hashtag activism has actually led to concrete change. In first speaker, opposition only wanted to prove that hashtags don't have effects, and we can see it now from their POI. But they clearly case shifted in second, because opposition realized that they couldn't fight on the examples of hashtag activism doing nothing, because they realized that one, this is factually wrong, and secondly, they couldn't win with their burden. We heard this case shift in second when they decided to prove the active harms of hashtag activism, which we've already taken down. So aside from this blatant strategic error, let me disprove this. Second point of contention on engendering societal change. They told us that movements can spring up every decade, but there's no change. My second speaker already told you about how hashtag activism is a very recent thing and is not something that springs up every decade and has no change. And then we heard no response from second speaker. More importantly, this is a concession, because if they truly claim that hashtag activism only has short-term change, and when the movement disappears, then change does not occur. First of all, this concedes that at the very least, we achieve short-term change. So this is already a clear concession that should make proposition take the debate. But it also means that opposition concedes, because they say that when the movement disappears, then change disappears. They concede that the movement is directly related to change occurring. We think that as long as the hashtag activism movement is there, change will occur. This is something the opposition have agreed to. This is a very clear concession to our entire case. We clearly win on this. Lastly, on empowering victims. They told us that more victims coming out will lead to desensitization. We think that this is disgusting, right? To say that rape victims shouldn't come out because they lead to desensitization. So we think that we should already negate the argument based on this. Further extension on existing victims. We think that you give current victim impact statements more weight and more legitimacy when the entire society is behind it. We think that this is when victims' impact statements really matter. This is what we saw in the Larry Nassar case, for example. We think we're clearly won on this. So this is why we think that a step towards hashtag activism is a giant leap for society and for political change. I'm so proud to propose.
Thank you very much to the third substantive speaker for the proposition, and our final substantive speaker from opposition. Please welcome.
that proposition has failed, in which they pushed aside every single harm that we presented you with and refused to engage with any of our speakers about any of our substantives. We've given you true and concrete reasons as to why activism through hashtags is short-term and not going to be effective for a long time, and they always want to push forward the burden of enacting short-term change without having to concede the fact that this motion is about long-term political change within the government and being able to proliferate this notion in which people are forever being protected and not have to rely on decades of posting hashtag activism on Facebook and having to revive a new post every single 10 years to achieve the effects that they want. We think that their entire case have two premises. Firstly, about how slogans will lead to political change and how this mess of numbers is more important. We tell you that our first speaker, right from first, have dealt with exactly why these slogans are not effective in truly showing you the whole story and giving you the ability to enact political change. Because of how these kinds of stories are, number one, going to be kind of hostile and not going to be objective enough to be adapted into policies, how these kinds of issues are, number two, going to be desensitized by the public because of the fact that these kinds of importance are downplayed, and I'll rehash this further on in my clashes. The messes, no thank you, the point about messes leading to political change, my second speaker also showed you examples of how thousands of posts online would never weigh out the importance or be as effective as people stepping up and truly showing you a speech full of emotions and true whole stories in which they can convey to you and convince you to accept the fact that this issue needs political change. They have no analysis or reason why as to why, no thank you, these kinds of messes are more important than having people step up and tell you about the stories in real life. We tell you that the moment they have these kinds of hashtag activism being an option for people, it is much less likely on their side that people will be wanting to step out because of the pure fact that they think that, oh, if I retweet this Me Too campaign on Twitter, I've already done my part. I've already advocated feminism. No thank you. No thank you. Two questions for today's debate. Firstly, which side truly forwards long-term political change? And secondly, which side creates more awareness and meaningful activism? Firstly, which side better forwards long-term political change? If hashtag activism is as effective and amazing in giving long-term political change as their side characterized, then why, after their claims of he for she campaigns, now this Me Too campaign still has to come out and bring people another meaning to feminism? We tell you that the issue on their side is that even if these kinds of hashtag activism has done change, it requires another campaign after a few years just to forward another type of change. We don't see how this is, number one, sustainable, number two, in any way going to be effective enough to create the kind of change they have placed upon themselves. We think that these kinds of change are going to be short-term and ineffective in creating really forwarding social justice issues such as feminism. If they really want to push forward their example of Ford, we tell you that for Ford, they could give the females who were abused $22 million. We think that after this $22 million of compensation, the more kinds of campaigns that's going to pop up, it's going to cause people to be less sensitized to these kinds of issues. Ford can choose to pay people less and less and less until at a point of time in which these kinds of issues are dropped and Ford just don't care anymore, and these kinds of issues spring up again, in which another hashtag campaign has to run along again. We don't see how this is going to create these kinds of amazing long-term effective change in order to forward any kinds of feminism or change in society. We tell you that our first speaker gave you the entire point about government and public complacency, about how actions taken are minimal, and as long as the effects of these campaigns are shown, then these issues are going to be likely to be dropped by both the public and the government, and no kinds of political change will then ensue. We think that their side has dropped this critical line of analysis that effectively destroys their first speaker case. We think that because they decided to engage with our point, we don't see how any kinds of examples they have given us about China, about MBS, about Saudi Arabia, about Ford is going to stand. If these kinds of issues are just going to be dropped if issues are just going to be dropped by Ford and then have to be revived years again for them to take any action in the first place. Furthermore, we think that our second speaker also, stemming from my first speaker, she also told you about how media being involved in social justice issues is bad. Because of the fact that it leaves the notion within the government and the people that because the media has always been overblowing and sensationalizing stuff, these kinds of hashtag activism is therefore also overblowing and sensationalizing real life social justice issues. We don't see how these kinds of inaccurate representation or inaccurate notions that people have about these social justice issues is going to help forward these kinds of forward any kinds of policies in the first place. So moving on to my second clash about which side creates more awareness and meaning for activism. Even if we concede to their best case, that hashtag activism has effects, that these kinds of companies will take into effect that, oh, I've abused people for a long time, now I want to repay them. We have already told you from our first speaker that this effect is short term, that this effect is not meaningful for anything. No thank you. once the campaign has been dropped. Our second speaker also gave you representative of issues that were warped by the very notion that people have because of these kinds of hashtag activism. We show you that activism is not meaningful in the way in which people convey it through social media, because it is not going to convince anybody. It's not going to have long-term impacts on the government or policies in any way. In the moment that you overblow this and cause it to be sensationalized and then drop a few years later, we don't see how this is going to really forward any kinds of policies or political change that they so want to advocate for. We tell you that when we have town council sessions in which people who now have another avenue open up to them, even in countries who are very ultra-conservative, we think that these kinds of protected sessions would then allow a lot of people who were not able to speak their minds before will now be able to go to these kinds of sessions and forward their ideas, forward their queries and their questions. We think this is much more effective than any kinds of online posts that you want to have, because of the very fact that these stories will now be whole, will now be true, and will now hold emotion and significance within governments, and give the government enough reason to prioritize these kinds of queries that people have, and give people the ability to speak out to their governments to forward social issues as a whole. As our side have proven to you how we exactly is able to enable for long-term and effective change in policies, and give you the best case scenario of how social issues can then be forwarded, go inside opposition.